Susan Sontag's 1975 polemic Illness as Metaphor presents a formidable intellectual challenge, functioning as a work of cultural criticism, a philosophical inquiry into language, and a profound act of patient advocacy. Composed during her own initial confrontation with cancer, the essay aims to demystify illness, specifically tuberculosis and cancer, by stripping away the punitive and sentimental metaphors that have accrued around them. This analysis will proceed through a systematic evaluation of the work's internal claims, examining the architecture of Sontag's arguments, the evidence she marshals, and the logical force of her conclusions on a chapter-by-chapter basis. The objective is to scrutinize the project of linguistic purification she proposes, assessing its power and its inherent complexities from the perspective of a contemporary academic audience. The essay seeks to illuminate the enduring resonance of her critique, while also probing the foundations upon which her celebrated thesis rests. Section 1, The Dual Citizenship of Sickness. Sontag opens her argument with a potent and memorable framing device: the proposition that everyone holds dual citizenship in the kingdom of the well and the kingdom of the sick. This initial conceit immediately establishes illness as a universal, albeit unwelcome, destination. Her core claim in this section is that the passage into the kingdom of the sick is frequently accompanied by a baggage of metaphor that renders the experience punitive. The illness becomes more than a biological event; it acquires a moral or psychological meaning. Sontag posits that these metaphors obscure the physical reality of the disease, transforming it into a judgment on the character of the afflicted. Her evaluation of this metaphorical burden begins with the assertion that the most frightening illnesses are those that are poorly understood, their etiology and cure remaining opaque. This opacity creates a void that metaphor rushes to fill. The strength of this initial section lies in its powerful, almost allegorical, setup. It provides a universal entry point into a specialized argument. The evidence here is more atmospheric than empirical, relying on the reader's intuitive recognition of the cultural anxieties surrounding disease. The claim's effectiveness derives from its axiomatic quality. It feels true because it resonates with a latent cultural understanding of illness as a form of otherness. A critical examination reveals that Sontag's premise assumes a clear distinction between a literal, biological reality and a metaphorical, cultural overlay. Her entire project depends on the separability of these two realms, a proposition that becomes a central point of inquiry throughout the rest of her work and for her subsequent critics. Section 2, The Romantic Aura of Tuberculosis. The second major section of the essay undertakes a detailed historical exhumation of the metaphors surrounding tuberculosis in the 19th and early 20th centuries. Sontag's central claim is that TB was romanticized, construed as a disease that enhanced character and spiritualized the individual. It was seen as a malady of passion, sensitivity, and artistic temperament. To substantiate this, she draws heavily upon literary and biographical sources, invoking John Keats, the Brontes, and most significantly Thomas Mann's The Magic Mountain. Sontag argues that TB was perceived as a kind of refinement, a process that burned away the grosser aspects of the self, leaving a purer, more ethereal spirit. The disease was believed to accelerate life, to bestow a feverish creativity and a heightened awareness of beauty and mortality. Her methodology here is that of a literary historian, tracing a specific sensibility through its cultural artifacts. The evaluation of this section must acknowledge the persuasive power of her curated evidence. The examples she chooses are indeed potent illustrations of an aestheticized disease. A deeper critique, however, would question the universality of this experience. Her analysis privileges the perspective of the educated, literary elite. The experience of a poor factory worker suffering from consumption likely involved far less romantic spiritualization and far more squalid reality. Sontag's argument is compelling as an analysis of a specific cultural mythos, one that shaped artistic production and the self-perception of a certain class. The claim's limitation is its potential overstatement of this mythos as the definitive experience of tuberculosis, thereby creating a new, albeit academically sophisticated, master narrative for the Section 3 Cancer and the Repression of Vitality, transitioning from the consumptive past to the cancerous present, Sontag constructs her next major argument around a stark contrast. Her claim is that cancer is the anti-romantic disease, its metaphors drawing from imagery of repression, stagnation, and cellular mutiny, where tuberculosis was a disease of too much passion. Cancer is framed as a disease of insufficient passion, a consequence of emotional inhibition and a life unlived. The cancer patient, in this metaphorical economy, is someone who has repressed their feelings, particularly anger and desire, leading to an internal insurrection of the cells. The body turns against itself. Sontag is meticulous in detailing this metaphorical landscape, arguing that it paints the cancer patient as emotionally deficient. The evidence for this claim is drawn from the post-psychology and alternative health literature of the mid-20th century, with specific reference to the theories of Wilhelm Reich and Georg Grodek. She scrutinizes their ideas, which link personality types to physical afflictions, and finds them to be a modern form of victim blaming. The evaluation of this section finds Sontag on her firmest ground. Her critique of the psychologizing of cancer etiology is both powerful and prescient. She correctly identifies the insidious way in which this line of thought shifts the burden of responsibility onto the patient, making them culpable for their own suffering. The argument's force lies in its clear ethical dimension. Sontag illuminates the cruelty of a framework that suggests a change in attitude or the release of repressed emotions could have prevented or might cure a complex biological pathology. This section forms the moral core of the entire essay, demonstrating with chilling clarity how a seemingly benign metaphorical system can become an instrument of psychological torment. Section 4 The pervasive logic of military metaphor. Sontag dedicates a crucial portion of her analysis to the examination of military metaphors in medical discourse, a trope she finds particularly dominant in discussions of cancer. The central claim here is that describing illness and its treatment in terms of warfare is profoundly dehumanizing and misleading. The body becomes a battlefield. The immune system mounts a defense. Cancer cells are foreign invaders and must be attacked with therapeutic magic bullets or radiation bombardment. Sontag contends that this language frames the patient as a passive landscape upon which a violent conflict is waged. Furthermore, it sets up an aggressive, all-or-nothing approach to treatment, where side effects are acceptable collateral damage in the war against the disease. Her analysis here is a pioneering work in what would become the field of medical humanities. She demonstrates a keen sensitivity to the power of language to shape clinical practice and patient experience. The evaluation of this claim must recognize its immense influence. The critique of military metaphors is now a standard element of discussions in medical ethics and communication. A more nuanced assessment, however, requires acknowledging that Sontag gives little consideration to the potential psychological utility of these metaphors for some patients. For certain individuals, framing their illness as a fight may be an empowering strategy, a way to mobilize their own resources and feel active in their treatment. Sontag's analysis presents the military metaphor as monolithically damaging. She offers a compelling case for its negative consequences, especially its tendency to promote overly aggressive and impersonal medical interventions while leaving the subjective experience of the empowered fighter largely unexamined. Her focus remains on the systemic, cultural evil damage wrought by this linguistic convention. Section 5 The etiology of blame and the cancer personality. This section deepens the critique initiated earlier, focusing with forensic precision on the concept of the cancer-prone personality. Sontag's core argument is that the attempt to link cancer to specific psychological traits represents the most pernicious form of metaphorical thinking, as it directly imputes guilt to the sick. She dissects the profile of the supposed cancer personality, someone anhedonic, repressed, incapable of discharging anger, and alienated from their own instincts. She argues that this psychological caricature is less a scientific finding and more a projection of cultural anxieties about modernity, emotional restraint, and the supposed costs of civilization. The evidence she presents is a close reading of psychosomatic theories, which she exposes as being circular and unfalsifiable. If a patient is demonstrably expressive, the theory suggests their expression is merely a mask for deeper repression. Sontag's great insight here is to connect this modern psychologizing to older, pre-scientific beliefs about illness as divine punishment for sin. The language has changed from theology to psychology, but the underlying function remains the same: to provide a causal explanation that places the fault squarely on the individual. The evaluation of this claim confirms it as one of the most durable and significant contributions of the work. Sontag effectively demonstrates how speculative psychological frameworks, when applied to disease, can function as a sophisticated mechanism of social control and moral judgment. Her argument provides a powerful defense of the patient against the well-intentioned but ultimately harmful impulse to find a psychological meaning or cause for every biological affliction. It is a demand for intellectual rigor and compassion in the face of suffering. Section 6. The asceticism of literal interpretation. In her concluding arguments, Sontag brings her polemic to its ultimate point, issuing a call for the liberation of illness from the prison of metaphor. The central claim is that the healthiest way of being sick is to resist all metaphorical interpretation and to apprehend the illness in its most literal, physical terms. She advocates for an almost ascetic relationship to language, where the disease is understood purely as a malfunction of cells, a biological process devoid of any transcendent or symbolic meaning. To Sontag, this is an act of intellectual and emotional honesty. It is a way to reclaim the illness as a part of life, a medical condition, rather than a curse, in judgment, or a secret message from the psyche. The ideal she proposes is a world where a diagnosis is received as simple information, free from the echoes of cultural dread and romantic fantasy. An evaluation of this final claim must grapple with its radical and perhaps utopian nature. While the impulse behind it is clear and compassionate, the feasibility of such a project is debatable. Can human beings, as meaning-making creatures, truly experience a profound life event like a serious illness without resorting to metaphor? Language itself is deeply metaphorical, and the attempt to achieve a purely literal discourse about something as existentially charged as cancer could be an impossible task. There is a certain irony, as some scholars have noted, in Sontag's own masterful use of metaphor throughout the book, beginning with the two kingdoms, to argue for the abolition of metaphor. This final section reveals the work's true nature as a polemic. It pushes its argument to a logical extreme to make its point with maximum force. The value of her claim lies less in its practical achievability and more in the ethical direction it points toward a conscious and critical scrutiny of the metaphors we use, aiming for those that empower and clarify, while discarding those that punish and abuse. In conclusion, Susan Sontag's illness as metaphor endures as a landmark of 20th century critical thought precisely because of the intellectual rigor and moral clarity of its internal claims. The section-by-section evaluation reveals a carefully constructed argument that moves from a general premise about the punitive nature of metaphor to specific historical case studies of tuberculosis and cancer, and finally to a broad critique of military and psychological language in medicine. Her analysis of the romanticized consumptive and the repressed cancer patient brilliantly illuminates how cultural narratives shape the experience of disease. The work's most powerful and unassailable contribution is its systematic dismantling of the etiological frameworks that blame the sick for their sickness, a critique that has had a profound and lasting impact on patient rights and medical ethics. Sontag's final call for a purely literal understanding of illness, while perhaps philosophically idealistic, functions as a powerful rhetorical device that forces the reader to confront the deep-seated impulse to moralize disease. The essay itself is a testament to the power of incisive prose and courageous argumentation. It successfully carved out a new space for inquiry, demonstrating that the language we use to describe illness is never neutral. It is, as Sontag so compellingly argued, a matter of life and death, and her work remains an essential guide for navigating that complex and often perilous terrain. It stands as a foundational text, a brilliant polemic whose critical questions about the intersection of language, culture, and human suffering continue to demand our most serious consideration.